the day my husband handed me divorce papers. He was wearing the tie I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. I remember staring at that tie, navy blue with small silver stripes, one I'd spent 40 minutes picking out at Nordstrom. Because I wanted something that looked expensive without being flashy. Something that said I know you. And thinking, this man has worn my love around his neck for 3 years since I gave him that gift, and he has been lying to me for at least 2 of them. Lydia, he said, like my name was something he was handing back to me. Just sign it. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I'd cried the night before, alone in our daughter's dressing room while she slept. Her small hand curled near her face the way it had been since she was a baby. But standing in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning, with the papers on the granite countertop I'd spent weeks choosing, I felt something cold and very still settle inside me. I picked up the pen. You're sure about this? I asked. My husband, I'll call him by what he was, not his name, looked at the window instead of at me. I've never been more sure of anything. I signed. What he didn't know, what I had spent 14 months making sure he would never know, was that I'd already been planning for this moment. Not because I wanted the marriage to end. I had tried everything. 2 rounds of couples counseling, 1 therapist on my own, a trip to Sedona that was supposed to be a reset, and ended up being 3 days of polite silence at a resort that cost more than our first car. I had tried. But somewhere between year 11 and year 13, I had also started to understand that trying alone wasn't the same as a marriage surviving. So while I was trying, I was also preparing. The joint account had my name on it, but the money I had quietly moved over the course of those 14 months was in an account that had only mine. I was a licensed CPA. I had worked part-time from home since our daughter was born, doing books for small businesses. 3 regular clients, sometimes 4. My husband knew about the work in a vague way, the way people know about the weather in a city they've never visited. He knew I sat at the desk in the corner of the guest room with my laptop, and sometimes took calls. He did not know what I billed, or that I had raised my rates twice in 3 years, or that one of my clients had referred me to their business partner. And I now had more work than I could comfortably handle. He had spent 13 years assuming I needed him more than he needed me. That assumption was his first mistake. Our daughter was 7. Her name is Rosie, which is what matters. Not the details of the custody arrangement my attorney had already spent 2 months preparing. We got equal legal custody on paper, but my husband traveled for work constantly. Something I had also documented, and in practice Rosie had always lived in my world. Her pediatrician knew my number. Her teacher emailed me. The babysitter I'd had since Rosie was 2 called me first for everything. The day after I signed the divorce papers, I booked 2 plane tickets to Portland, Oregon. Not because I had family there. I had a college friend there, my closest one, a woman named June who had a house with a spare room and a yard with a trampoline, and who had been telling me for 18 months that whenever I was ready, the room was there. I had called her the night before and said, I think I'm ready, she said. I'll make up the bed tonight. I told my husband we were going to visit June for 2 weeks. It wasn't a lie. It was just not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd already spoken to a real estate agent in Portland about rentals. The whole truth was that I had already researched the school district and found 2 elementary schools within 2 miles of June's neighborhood. The whole truth was that I was not coming back. We landed on a Thursday afternoon. June was waiting at arrivals with a sign that said Rosie and Rosie's mom in block letters. Because June had made that sign, and Rosie had seen it in a FaceTime 3 weeks before and laughed so hard she'd gotten hiccups. My daughter ran to her before the automatic doors had finished opening. That night, after Rosie was asleep on the pullout in June's craft room, which June had cleared and decorated with string lights specifically for this, I sat on June's back porch and told her everything. Not just the affair, the whole architecture of how the marriage had come apart, brick by brick, slowly enough that each individual loss seemed manageable until the day I stood back and realized the whole thing had been rubble for years. What do you need right now? June asked. I need to find us an apartment, I said, and I need to figure out how to tell Rosie we're not going home. Rosie took it better than I expected and worse than I hoped. She cried for 2 nights. She wanted her room, her books, the specific stuffed rabbit that had been left on her bed because I hadn't been able to pack everything without him noticing. June overnighted the rabbit. It arrived in 2 days, and the crying mostly stopped, and Rosie started asking questions about her new school instead. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. They are also more perceptive. About 3 weeks after we arrived, Rosie looked up from her cereal and said, It wasn't a question. I put down my coffee and looked at her. Yes, I said, he did. But that's between him and me, and none of it is about you. You understand? She nodded and went back to her cereal. But she didn't ask to call him that night. which she usually did on Tuesdays. I found us a 2-bedroom apartment in a building 8 blocks from June's house. The lease started on the 1st of the month. The school principal met with me for 40 minutes and walked me through the enrollment process and gave Rosie a tour herself, which I hadn't expected, and which made me like Portland in a way that felt like relief. My ex-husband's reaction to all of this came in a series of increasingly hostile text messages over about 10 days, followed by a call from his attorney, followed by a more measured series of texts that his attorney had clearly suggested he send instead. The substance of it was that he felt blindsided, that moving Rosie out of state was not what they'd agreed to, that he wanted to discuss it. I had already discussed it with my own attorney, who had reviewed the custody agreement and the temporary order, and advised me that what I had done was within my rights given the circumstances. My ex-husband's travel schedule was in the documentation. His involvement in Rosie's day-to-day life, or rather the consistent absence of it, was in the documentation. My attorney sent a letter. His attorney sent a letter back. This is how these things go. What I had not expected, what no amount of preparation had really prepared me for, was the call I got on a Wednesday morning in early October. I was at my desk with client files open, Rosie was at school, and my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize, a Portland area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know why I answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Calm, professional. She said she was calling from a family law office. She said she was representing a woman named Bethany Cole in a matter related to my ex-husband. I sat very still. Bethany Cole was my ex-husband's girlfriend. I had known about her for the last 8 months of the marriage. She was 31, she worked in marketing, and she had been the reasons my husband had started coming home after 10, on the nights he used to be home by 7. I knew her name because I had found it, the way women in my situation always find these things. A phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, a name that appeared too many times in the thread. The attorney said that her client was pregnant, about 5 months along, and that her client had retained legal counsel because she had become aware of certain financial irregularities related to my ex-husband's behavior during our marriage that she believed I should know about. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Because," the attorney said, "my client believes you may have a claim that she does not." I wrote down everything the attorney told me. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time without moving. Then I called my own attorney. Here is what I learned over the next 3 weeks. My ex-husband had been running a second set of books for a business he co-owned with his brother. Not a dramatic embezzlement in the Halseywood sense, no single enormous transfer, no offshore account in the Caymans. Something more ordinary and in some ways worse. Consistent, methodical misrepresentation of income, invoices paid to shell entities, expenses claimed that were personal. He had been doing it for years. His partner, not his brother, a third partner I had never met, had hired a forensic accountant about 6 months before our divorce. The forensic accountant had found things. The IRS tends to take an interest in things like that. What Bethany's attorney had figured out, and what she was calling to tell me, was that certain assets my ex-husband had claimed were business-related. Assets that had formed part of the divorce settlement, assets that had been assigned to him and deducted from what I received, were not, in fact, business assets. They were personal, which meant the settlement I had signed was based on incomplete and possibly fraudulent financial disclosure. My attorney used the word reconsideration. She used the phrase motion to reopen. I used the word yes. There was a custody hearing scheduled for November, the one where my ex-husband's attorney was planning to argue that my move to Portland, without formal court approval, constituted interference with his parental rights. I had been preparing for that hearing for weeks. I had the documentation, the school records, June's address, the pediatrician we'd started seeing, the way my ex-husband had missed 11 of the last 16 scheduled calls before I left. The hearing happened on a Tuesday. My ex-husband sat across the room from me in a gray suit, and I noticed that he was not wearing the navy tie. He looked tired. He had lost some weight. His attorney made the argument that I had unilaterally relocated a minor child without consent. My attorney presented the documentation. The judge asked my ex-husband's attorney to clarify the nature of his client's travel schedule over the preceding 18 months. The attorney clarified. The judge asked my ex-husband directly how many of his scheduled pairing time blocks he had exercised in the calendar year. There was a pause. "I travel for work," he said. The judge looked at him for a moment and then looked back at her papers. "I'm aware," she said. The judge did not rule in my ex-husband's favor on the relocation question. She also scheduled a separate hearing on the financial disclosure matter, which his attorney had not anticipated, and which, from the look on my ex-husband's face when his attorney leaned over to explain what that meant, he had also not anticipated. I did not smile. I had promised myself I would not smile in that room, and I kept the promise. But walking out of the courthouse into the November air, I stopped on the steps and looked up at the sky for a moment, and I breathed. 3 weeks after that hearing, the second thing I hadn't prepared for happened. Bethany called me herself. Not through her attorney. Directly. I don't know how she got my number, and I almost didn't answer for the same reason I almost hadn't answered the first time, but I did. Her voice was quieter than I expected, younger sounding. She said she was sorry to call directly. She said she'd been wanting to say something for a while, and her attorney had kept telling her not to, but that she'd decided some things were more important than legal strategy. I didn't know he was married, she said. Not at first. By the time I know that doesn't change anything for you. I know that. I just wanted you to know that I wasn't. I didn't go into it knowing. I stood in my kitchen and looked out the window at the street below. The November leaves, a man walking a dog. It doesn't change what happened, I said. I know, but I appreciate you saying it. We didn't talk long. She was due in January. She said she didn't know what she was going to do, that it was complicated, that she had her own things to figure out. I believed her. People tend to think these situations come in two varieties, the knowingly malicious and the completely innocent. But human beings are messier than that, and I had spent enough time in the wreckage of my own marriage to have stopped needing a cleaner story. When we hung up, I sat down on the kitchen floor, which is something I do sometimes when the weight of something is more than I can hold standing up. I sat there for a while. Then I got up, because Rosie was going to be home in 40 minutes and I had promised her we'd make pancakes for dinner. She had been asking for pancake dinner for 3 weeks. It had become a thing. Every few days she'd look at me and say tonight, and I'd say not tonight, and she'd say tomorrow, and I'd say maybe tomorrow, until I'd finally said yes, Tuesday pancake dinner on Tuesday. And she had announced this to June on FaceTime with the gravity of someone announcing a state occasion. I made the pancakes. I let Rosie pour the batter, which meant the first 2 were shapeless, and one had a hole in the middle, and she laughed at all of them. We ate at the small table by the window, with the string lights on, because we'd started keeping them up past their seasonal purpose. And Rosie told me about a girl at school named Priya, who had a dog with 3 legs and a brother in 5th grade who could do a backflip. I listened to every word. The financial disclosure hearing happened in January. I was not there in person, my attorney handled it, but she called me the same evening. The details took a while to explain, and involved some things I had to ask her to repeat. The condensed version. The forensic accounting had confirmed what Bethany's attorney suspected. My ex-husband's financial disclosures during the divorce had been materially inaccurate. The settlement was being reopened. My ex-husband's co-owner had also filed a separate civil suit. The IRS matter was ongoing. My attorney said the word exposure several times, which in legal contexts is not a reassuring word. I don't take pleasure in other people's suffering, even people who have hurt me. What I felt when she told me was not satisfaction exactly. It was something more like the cessation of a low-grade noise that had been running in the background. For so long I'd stopped hearing it as noise, and started hearing it as the natural sound of the world. It stopped. The quiet was loud. Rosie started 2nd grade at her new school in January. She got a teacher she liked, a tall woman with red-framed glasses and a classroom full of plants. She made a best friend within 3 weeks, a girl named Charlotte who lived 4 blocks from us, and whose mother texted me on a Saturday morning to ask if Rosie wanted to come for a playdate. And I stood in my kitchen reading that text and felt something so ordinary it was almost radical. I felt fine. Not happy in a dramatic way, not triumphant. Just fine, in the way that fine can mean the structure is sound, the foundation is holding, the walls are where they should be. I took on a 4th client in February, a small restaurant group that needed someone to overhaul 3 years of disorganized books. It was more work than I had time for, technically, but I liked the problem and I liked the owner, a woman in her 60s who had started the business with her sister and ran it with a directness I found refreshing. I rearranged my schedule and made it work. In March, my attorney called to tell me that a revised settlement offer had been submitted. The number was different from the first one. I want to be careful about how I say what I felt when I heard it, because money is not the point of this story. It was never the point. The point was my daughter, and the quiet, and the pancake dinners, and the school with the plants. But money is also not nothing. Especially when you are a woman who spent years making yourself smaller so a man could feel larger. And when the systems that were supposed to protect you during the dissolution of your marriage had been presented with false information. What I felt was not about the number. It was about the accounting. Finally, the accounting was accurate. I accepted the offer. The day I got the confirmation email, I took Rosie to the botanical garden, which she had been asking to visit since we'd driven past it in September. We walked around for 2 hours. She was fascinated by the cactus section, which I had not expected, and we spent a long time there. While she asked questions, I mostly couldn't answer about why cacti store water and whether they can feel things, and if a cactus could theoretically live forever. I don't know, I told her, but I think some of them live a very long time. Like hundreds of years? Some of them. She thought about this. That's kind of nice, she said. On the drive home, she fell asleep in the back seat. I drove slowly, taking the long way, no particular reason except that the afternoon light was doing something lovely to the hills, and I wasn't ready for the day to be over. My ex-husband has since moved to a smaller apartment. I know this not because I've been tracking him, but because these things come back to you in fragments. The way information about someone you used to share a life with always eventually does. He is dealing with the legal matters. I hope he finds his way through them, genuinely, because whatever he did to me and whatever choices he made, he is still Rosie's father, and Rosie loves him, and that means I have to hold space for the possibility of him being better than he was. I don't know what happened with Bethany. I don't know if she had her baby, or what her situation is now, or what she decided. I find myself hoping she's okay, which is something I would not have predicted feeling a year ago. What I know is this. I am sitting at my desk in a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, with a cup of coffee going cold beside my keyboard and the sound of Rosie's morning cartoons coming faintly through the wall. In 40 minutes, I will make her breakfast and walk her to school. This afternoon, I will spend 3 hours on the restaurant group's books, which are coming along better than expected. Tonight, June is coming over for dinner, and Rosie has already requested that June bring her dog, which June always does anyway. The navy tie is somewhere in a house in another city. It doesn't belong to me anymore. Neither does the grief I carried for longer than I should have, or the version of myself who kept signing up to be an afterthought in her own life. I learned something in the past year that took me too long to learn, and that I think about often. The opposite of being overlooked is not being seen dramatically, in some loud public way, with witnesses and declarations and a moment where everyone finally understands your worth. The opposite of being overlooked is just living, fully, in the life you rebuilt while no one was watching. Rosie just turned the cartoon off. I can hear her in the kitchen. Mom, she calls. Is there any orange juice? Check the second shelf, I call back. There is a pause. Then found it. I close my laptop. I get up. I go make my daughter breakfast.